Eri Minami, the temperance arcana, the stepmother, the mystic, the future MLM victim, is probably one of the most unique characters within Persona's social link system, even across the other games. The Persona games are made with a wide array of life experiences and backgrounds in mind. Their entire structure is built upon the idea of these underlying systems of archetypes that transcend culture and time. But that may be something that slips a lot of people's minds in a game with two total unrelated female characters that you can't date or do anything weird with. And of course, this isn't an indictment on the quality of those characters and story, which I obviously think are great. Obviously. Look what I'm doing with my time. Obviously, I think they're great. But I think the disconnect happens when Eri draws to empathize with a life perspective not often the onus of the average player base for a Persona game. That is, to empathize with a very unique struggle of a stepmother and her attachment with her child. Even throwing things interpersonality more likened and common to young and even more aged mother stereotypes, being a focus on mysticism, but we'll get into that later. I like this refreshing story, and it's cool that it sort of fills out the three ways that disjunctive family relationships are seen through the story of Persona 4. In Nanako and Dojima, you see both of their sides near equally. In Shu and his mother, we see Shu's perspective primarily, and in Eri and Yuta, we see the mother primarily. I think this was intentionally done to broaden not just types of family dynamics that can exist, but the validity of each perspective involved. Family, found family, and reassurance in who you are and who your family is being a consistent sub-theme throughout the game. Eri's character arc is essentially to stop wallowing in her own self-defeatism, her pessimism about the resulting actions of her own decisions, and her learning to take firm grasp of her life and her destiny, making effort to move things the way that she wants, with her own power and her own will. You begin the temperance social link after taking the daycare job in the shopping district, and among the other children that you look after, you see Yuta, who seems to be somewhat of a problem child, although not a malicious or mean one necessarily. The first thing we see is Yuta being left last to be picked up, as Eri gets there later than she was supposed to. This illustrates her general lack of motivation and direction in her life immediately, but it also introduces her in a very negative way, something Persona 4 is not shy about doing in the slightest. From Ai to Shu to Naoki, Persona 4 introduces a lot of characters this way, and while understandable, it is unfortunate that because of this approach, many players aren't willing to stick it out or commit to these links on their first playthrough, when going in blind at least. From the initial interaction, Yuta running ahead, and then the other daycare supervisor coming over to gossip to you, you get an idea that this is a fairly fresh union. Eri is his stepmom, and neither of them really know each other or know how to understand each other and their place in their newfound relationship. Their relationship with one another is still fresh. In between Social Link 1 and 2, it's confirmed that Eri and Yuta have lived together for 6 months, and the man that she fell in love with is now in the city on a long business trip for hours and days on end. So essentially, she has been saddled up with this kid of her lover, a kid that she barely knows, as his primary caretaker. A very unique, difficult situation. Her loneliness initially being from the city and feeling the judgment toward her as an outsider in this town, something we see in the previous link, also weighs on her. It makes her question if she made the right decision after all, if she belongs here. She's someone who is very lonely, with no one to talk to, no one to get advice from. She mentions that she rarely even gets to have the conversation that she has with you in her daily life because of her being so far away from everyone she knows. Her husband being unavailable, and this new child that's been thrown in her lap knowing almost nothing about each other, the age difference, the gender gap, it's too much. Rank 2 starts implying Yuta's potential guilt over this woman having to do things for him all the time, and his implied awareness at the workers and other mothers judging her. It's something we see more later, but I think we get those first few kernels here. She also mentions in this link the jealousy for TV dramas and the perfect families and fathers in those shows. This is the first of many links focusing on the TV in her life, which, for a game so focused around people watching a midnight TV station, is actually not that much of a visual metaphor in most of the situations in the game. It's not used much in other social links. It's clear, though, that the imagery of the TV is being used in the same way that is implied thematically for the rest of the game, though. It's clear here that she feels negatively toward Yuta, but not because she dislikes him. It's more of a self-pity, a negative feeling that she tries to describe here as well. Next link is the first mention of the Featherman Rangers show, a parody of Super Sentai, or Power Rangers as we know them in the West, and more specifically one of Yuta's peers provoking and belittling him for not knowing about the Rangers, causing Yuta to chase him around. There doesn't seem to be incident, and it's probably a mix of play, but I remember this exact sort of thing on the playground when I was young too. There would be that one angry kid who people would intentionally provoke to make him chase everyone. Even though it was a game, there was still genuine anger there, and genuine insult involved. I think that's what's getting portrayed here, and sets the groundwork for a different aspect of Yuta that we're informed of later. After seemingly that same friend goes home with his dad, Yuta asked Eri when his dad is coming home. To her lack of an answer, and him going off to stay with the friend, this gives insight into their mutual loneliness, rather than just Eri's side that we've come to know so far. This is also where Eri opens up about her regrets and feelings of abandonment in her marriage. I mean, he did marry her, give her his kid, and then he runs off to China for months on end? So yeah, in my opinion, he's probably a scumbag, as a husband and a father, but that's not what I want to draw attention to here. Instead, it's the fact that you can't read her expression. This is extremely rare in Persona 4, even with manipulative or complicated characters. Yu normally states outright that the smile seems fake, or that someone is smiling wholeheartedly. He gives the interpretation in his description to the player. But in this case, the interpretation of people's emotions and general ability for him to read people is probably not even thought of much whenever you play the game. But here, he actually doesn't know. It shows that there is a difference between you, some omnipotent narrator, and you, the person within the game. Confused enough that he doesn't give a straight commitment. He can't tell if it's genuine or not. And I think that comes down to one thing I mentioned earlier, that her story is very much outside the wheelhouse of the experience for you and the average player base. That, and I think her emotions are so multifaceted and mixed that maybe she even doesn't know if the words she says sometimes are genuine. She's clearly a very open person, but she doesn't at this point have a great grasp on her own life and decisions, her own feelings and thoughts, and the root of those things. Next rank, Minami attempts to bond with Yuta by going to a nice restaurant, but he's not interested. This is the first time that Minami will try to buy his approval. But for anyone who paid attention to the subtle foreshadowing, Yuta isn't interested in going to the restaurant, not because he doesn't like or want to spend time with her, but because he feels guilt over her having to take care of him, even though to him she's still mostly a stranger. Which is pretty nuanced for a kid character, honestly. Still, Eri doesn't understand this, so she feels tired and rejected over and over. She feels like maybe it's just hopeless. She mentions the TV again, this time. How she left in the middle of a show. She mentions how maybe it wasn't worth it to try. And that from the TV, she heard something about maternal instincts kicking in due to breastfeeding. Something that she's never done. This isn't a completely accurate thing when it comes into psychology. From the psych courses that I took, many will feel maternal instincts for the child after the birth, even for mothers with severe nipple inversions who maybe can't nurse the baby personally. And along those lines, some mothers still don't feel that feeling toward their kid even after breastfeeding. The point here is, TV has gone from a way to escape to a way it informs Eri's worldview and fills her loneliness. It's turned from an escape from the negative into something that actively misinforms her life and makes it worse. This next part is why I joked about her being a future MLM victim at the start of the essay, but it essentially is a more radical reveal to what we've been talking about with the TV. She mentions a speaker on the TV that teaches that life was determined before our birth, that we're all just little robots following our program as our creator made for us. So whenever anything happens, there's nothing you can do about that. It was already decided for you. She asks if that makes you feel better for you to hear. She asks if you think it's a wonderful concept, as she clearly is inspired and happy with. And I'm obviously going to respond no here. No, of course not. I hope for most people the toxicity of this mindset is apparent. And if I wanted to go into all of the routes for why, it would demand its own separate essay, but I will still give a few cliff notes on why here. What she's talking about is a general stoicism combined with determinism. Stoicism generally being good at treating your anxiety whenever it says not to beat yourself up for things that are out of your control. But then, this determinism is saying that it's all out of your control. When you combine the two ideas, in other words, everything you do, everything that happens, it's all out of your control, and nothing is your responsibility. This isn't a very nuanced type of determinism, though. You see, free will is not technically observable. There's not any way to see or study. We can only lay claim to our experience of it. But in that way, there is not a means to prove other animals don't experience it, since we haven't found the biological difference that would seemingly turn free-thinking humans into a robot. But as AI gets more advanced, it should be able to replicate a thinking process like free will, just from logical faculties. Combine that with a desire for pain and pleasure, and since every human is a little different, it's a line that is honestly very, very blurred whenever it comes to our current understandings of science and even philosophy. The takeaway really is that functionally, though, it doesn't matter if we are predetermined or have free will, because we are all under the inescapable feeling that we are moving with our own direction, and directing and observing our experiences as we live. It's too real, too close to us to ever separate ourselves from it, and so even if it turns out that everything we do is determined, and we are like little robots, it doesn't actually change much about the actual practical way that we live our lives, how we operate. So in other words, we are still in control of ourselves, even if the we doesn't refer to some ghost in the machine, but instead the culmination of the machine's parts and mechanisms. Meaning that even if we are determined, it doesn't change the fact that we still make the choices we do, and that every moment we make a choice, it was already like that. But anyways, hopefully that was a somewhat brief analysis for those that it may not have been immediately apparent, or some people who may just have been curious onto why this mindset is largely flawed on a few levels. Obviously, this is a side the game takes as well, with the false breastfeeding information given prior in the story. This is meant to be wrong. And after all, how could you seek the truth if you give up on directing your experiences entirely, either simulated or not? Telling her that it's not a good idea prompts her to pout and say that the speaker who said it on TV is really popular though, which is another obvious bandwagon fallacy. She says it's nice to know someone like you, and that everyone's entitled to their own ideas. And that isn't a bad sentiment in and of itself, but that's where that toxicity comes through. It's clear that she is using it as an excuse not to confront your denial of her belief. It's also ironic, as while she says that people are entitled to their own ideas, her idea was literally that all ideas and processes are not our own, and are out of our control, which is a contradiction unto itself. She frowns for a bit, but then she says that she liked the speaker, so she went to see a lecture personally, and was moved to tears by the idea of a higher power guiding her actions. This lack of free will linked with a higher power is really fun, because in the context of the TV, it sounds like an MLM of some sort, but it also is a reference to the mentality and belief of the god in this game, Izanami, and her view of the mentalities of Inaba, that they are people who don't truly seek the truth, but seek convenient truths to escape their struggles. But it could also be a reference to the law system in mainline Shin Megami Tensei, which most of the time positions law as a free will lacking area being directed by the command of Yahweh or God. Meaning, if I were to analyze this with the Shin Megami Tensei lens, she is a law-aligned character, motivated to do so out of a fear and guilt over the free will of her own actions, and the comfort that a stronger, smarter power can carve the life intended for her instead. The real point of this link, though, and wow, we've talked about this one for a while, but it really is dense, is her mentioning again that she is far from the city without much to do, and all that she has is the TV and internet to keep her company. As Persona 4 is focused on the improvement of the self and grasping for the truth, this makes Edi's central struggle apparent. It's her willingness to escape into media and let others decide for her what truth is, instead of seeking it and finding the answer on her own. This time, then, at the TV, leads her to be fed lies about relationships, motherhood, and even her own personal directive. This is basically where you step in the social link, as Yuta comes to you for your perspective on the situation, and you let him know better how she feels and get to more substantially understand his guilt and how he feels sorry for her. This is about the time that her self-defeatedness starts to take hold. You realize the mutual pity that they hold for each other and how really what they need to do is communicate properly, which I've seen some people use as a way to dismiss this link as if it's ever really how reality works. This mother who feels like she is oppressing this child's life whom she hardly knows, and from her perspective, he could never care about or listen to what she says in his youthfulness. Why would she open up to him? That seems immature. It seems like she's not guiding as a parent. She's not filling her role. And why would he, or how would he even understand? She doesn't think he'll understand, care, or listen, and she has reason to believe that from his actions. Yet she also doesn't blame him. She thinks maybe she would do that too if she was in the same place, that acting in that manner is only natural for a child. Yuta also feels his very existence is a burden on his mother, and so he intentionally acts up so that she will forget about him and focus on herself instead. Why would he open up and tell her? It would only create for her more sympathy for his perspective, and make her try harder to make it work, despite her, from his perspective, still being forced to do it. This is good writing! It may not be the most exciting social link, and most of them do take place with basically the same location, but this is a complex conflict that really makes sense if you pay attention to the characters and who they are. From here, you're essentially on the resolution of the rest of the social link. There are many elements brought up that are resolved one by one. When playing Featherman with school kids, it becomes apparent Yuta doesn't actually know much about Featherman, and that's because Eri is consumed with listening to the TV and letting her tell it its truth. It's lies. Her character arc resolves then when she realizes it's not necessarily material goods that Yuta wants, but to watch this show. And they can do it together.
I was scared, but I've learned my lesson now. I won't just try and escape into my own personal time.
She then gives up the thing that has been telling her false truths and chooses her own truth to be a mom that listens and speaks. Watching the show together with Yuta, they begin to finally bond. There is also a bit where Eri gets him a Featherman Ranger, and he speaks to you about wanting to return the favor with another gift of his own, driving home Yuta's good nature. Next, the mentioned violence is brought up again for the forefront by gossiping housewives saying that Yuta is a bully who attacks people and will eventually become a delinquent. When Yuta misunderstands why his mom is crying, he hits you, but it should be clear from prior context, such as the kids intentionally belittling Yuta and trying to provoke him, that the housewives, what they're saying? It's wrong. He's not a violent bully, but someone who's extremely sensitive with a big heart. Someone that isn't afraid to take action, step outside of the group, and defend others when he feels like they are being treated poorly. Of course, punching people is a big no-no, as you say as a kid, but the underlying personality and motivations behind these actions prove to be anything but premature delinquency. Eri learns then not to give into or listen to the gossip around her son, the false truths about his behavior and who he is and what he's going to become, but instead reach out to the truth and know who he is for herself, as someone who should know best. His mom. Yuta also comes to understand and be more defensive and affectionate toward his mother from the things that keeps her down. It's a great story that I honestly think is overlooked for so many people for such a long time, and one with a lot to say if you couldn't tell by the length of this segment. By the way, we still have a lot to say, but if you like the thorough job and effort that I've been putting in here, please consider liking, commenting, and sharing where Persona fans can see this, as this is a part of a long-running Persona 4 Golden analysis series. Also, turn on the bell to become notified, and maybe consider checking out my Patreon or Twitch, which helps me keep going in a financially viable manner. The pandemic has obviously made things very hard, and I would really appreciate the support. On to the Arcana. Eri Minami as you know, is the Temperance Arcana, which to my research has the relevant meanings in regards to her character. The Temperance card involves an angel, specifically Michael, which, from the SMT analytical perspective I briefly mentioned earlier, makes sense with her tendency toward law alignment. Michael is mixing the liquid in his card, which comes to the root origin for temperance, temporarity, meaning to mix and combine things in a proper manner. This mixing is something underlying the themes of other traits to be listed. One foot is on the land and the other is in the water. The water represents the pool of the public subconscious, something already heavily present in Persona's Jungian focus, but with Eri specifically, I think it represents her 1 foot in reality and 1 foot in escapism. This escapism being from large group seminars, famous speakers on TV. She is linked to the perceptions of the public, but also has a life very separate from the one she sees on the TV, like with the families and those dramas that she was so jealous of. The Temperance card is an encouragement to test and try things out. The Hebrew letter it comes from is samek, which actually refers to the tent pole in the center of the tent that keeps it stable. Eri struggles not wanting to try, fighting against giving up, and throughout her arc testing and trying various things, eventually coming to understand Yuta and move forward. This card is also heavily focused on the idea of a guardian angel or leading force in one's life direction and stability of one's mind. This is represented pretty clearly by Eri seeking a higher power initially as a means to make her own decisions, but this is also false. She eventually finds her real guardian force or angel in the child of Yuta, who, through mutual understanding, causes her to feel more comfortable in the situation she's landed in. The intelligence of the Temperance is that of the trial, which means that you will only find the answer once you try and try again. This matches, of course, with Eri in a very obvious way, so I'll move on. On the higher polarity, once again, it's braving criticism and taking heat from others, like the other mothers and school teachers, but regardless, finding and pushing through in your own path with your own angel near you. On the lower polarity, it's unwillingness to try and the desire to run from trials that have met you, which obviously contributes to the idea of her being in low polarity or reversed whenever you first meet her, and slowly seeing her switch to this higher state as she reaches a better place of mind. She goes from being late to picking Yuta up and almost forgetting to actively wanting to be by his side. So, in summary, Eri Minami, someone who had decisions that she regrets, loses faith in her ability to direct her own life, unable to try, and failing whenever she does. She is a character that learns to stop turning to the lies of TV pseudoscience, half-baked philosophy, and the lies of the gossiping peers around her, and in turn find her own truth, ultimately succeeding in her trial and forming a strong mutual bond with her stepson. A unique and dense character arc that speaks to the range of stories Persona is capable of telling. You may not relate to her specifically, but there's plenty about this message that could apply today to any generation if you just replace the TV with whatever you might end up finding dependence on for truth, like a phone, social media, or the online news, a friend group, or maybe a work circle, or the people around you. The story is plenty relatable and offers lots of good. Honestly, I'm surprised just how long this one ended up being from whenever I first sat down to work on and do it. I thought that this would be shorter, like my Sayoko essay, if you've seen that, or my Margaret one, but there was so much to cover here. I hope you enjoyed. A reminder that a like, comment, and share is godsent for me, pardon the pun, and that I have new videos on Persona 4 Golden coming out all the time, every week. So until next time,